Hello everyone, welcome to our panel today. Our topic at hand is a public dialogue on air pollution as a circular problem and youth-led policy making interventions. Before we begin, just yesterday I was checking the air pollution for Lahore, and as expected it was ranking number 1, round about with AQI of 160, and which is I think 4 times the permissible limit. And if it is not the number 1, it is usually struggling for that spot with Beijing and New Delhi. So as we begin, I think I'll ask my first question from Dr. Shahana, that air quality has been an issue, I think, at least for 5 to 7 years in Lahore especially, and I think we've been constantly leading the charts in that manner. So the first question is, how is usually air pollution measured, and what are some of the ways we can look at curbing it?
Great to have that question. What are usually ways that we measure air pollution? Depends on which part of the world you're in. If you're in a developed country, then there is a huge network of air pollution monitoring stations across the city. Whereas we here in Lahore perhaps have 2 working PM 2.5 sensors which are calibrated. There are a bunch of low-cost sensors, obviously. AQI is a good enough, air quality index is a good enough metric for the average public, but it's not something which is defendable in a court of law. It's a very relative metric which encompasses ozone concentrations, PM 2.5 concentrations, other gaseous pollutants, sort of this lumped together number. So it's fine to compare relatively, but if you're talking about, hey, I enforce this policy, my emissions reduced for coal burning, how much does that equate to in terms of PM 2.5? For that you need a quality measure, an EPA certified method to measure the PM 2.5 concentration. The figure that I put up in my talk, the annual average of 200 micrograms per meter cube, was based on a beta attenuation measurement through a device which costs tens of thousands of dollars. So it's not something which is that feasible for a country like Pakistan to have several of, which is why these low-cost sensors have sort of taken over the scene over here. And that's fine, because we should use our resources wisely towards reducing emissions and not necessarily towards monitoring. We know there's a problem, so then why do we really need so many monitors across the city and across the region? But it's something which needs to be done side by side. If we can increase our monitoring network by calibrating at least these low-cost sensors against the instruments, there's one against these the calibrated instruments, that would increase our understanding of what the local sources are, because we don't exactly know. Different studies point towards the PM 2.5 is coming more from the northeast direction. Oh no, it's coming more from the southwest direction. So that really differs whether it's coming from India versus it's coming from some place within Pakistan. So having a better monitoring network would help us answer those questions better. So in a nutshell, what should be would be a solid network of PM 2.5 measurements, because PM 2.5 forms with all these gas phase reactions. So you don't have to measure all the gas phase species. You can just measure to PM 2.5, and that tells you, indicates the level of gas phase pollutants also that are being emitted. But in the absence of that, if we can just have calibrated low-cost sensors telling us what the PM 2.5 concentrations are, we can get a sense of what the air quality is. And then your second question was?
My second question was, I think we'll just circle back to it because I think that was we'll just move on to Mr. Ali Khizr, moving along the same lines. So we've seen that we already have well familiar the kind of PM 2.5 levels that are being experienced in Lahore for the past few years, and of course it's visibly, the aerosols are visibly something that we can see in Lahore. What do you think has been the impact of smog in Lahore in the last 5 years?
So you see, the economic impact is there are 2 ways to look into it. One is the economic impact of the higher pollutants in the environment And the other is the what economic action can be taken to lower those PM 2.5 or the other pollutants which are causing so many other problems. So I would rather say that we need to see that what kind of economic action we are required to take to lower the value more. I would like to put in that way in this. Have you seen that the panelists are telling that how the Lahore the air quality and its pollutant has increased over the past many years, and now smog is a fifth season. So we need to understand that what's bringing into that, and then to lower it, we need to mitigate that impact first. So I mean, if we see this the studies on that, about 40% of the air pollution in Lahore or particularly in Punjab is due to the transportation and in transportation fuel. So that's very critical point of it. So I mean the number of cars, number of other vehicles on the road, and the kind of fuel they are operating on, and that has an impact. So if we see that Pakistan has about producing 2.5 million bikes a year versus 200,000 cars a year. So those bikes are in is a huge number in Lahore. I mean, there could be about every year 200,000 or close to that number of bikes are entering Lahore, and the total number of bikes in Lahore are probably million plus they're operating. So the problem with this with those bikes is this, because they because of the price conscious, their exhaust levels are not that great, and because those three wheelers and all that, so they're contributing hugely to this pollutants we have, and then the number of cars on the road are much higher. So what we need to do is we need to enhance the public transport in Lahore, and we need to move that public transport to the cleaner fuel. So today the world is moving their public transport on electric buses. So the EV buses are something we should look into it in Lahore, and increasingly more and more have that, and then try to reduce the number of private vehicles on the road. I mean, how would you do that? I mean, like we've seen that in India and in some parts of the China, they did in the odd and even vehicles coming up, but then that part didn't succeed. So what we need to do is we need to increase, number one, the public transport, and we should the city should be raising its taxes in a way, and then should be deploying over there on this. And how to raise taxes is through the congestion tax. So where the roads are busier, at the busy times apply the congestion test and take that congestion test to feed in for the investment in the buses and the public transport infrastructure.
So
So that's one thing is to do. Then other thing is like in the school hours. If you see the school hours, the levels are very high, and I mean there's so many private schools that, and every school you see that the cars coming in, dropping each kid and coming back, dropping it. So what one solution, private solution could come up is that the civil society of the Lahore sits with the school owners over there, the private school owners over there, where the people are coming on the cars and all that, and ask them to use that public transport and provide them good quality public transport moving from the area. And then they have like security and teaching staff sitting over there, so the rich people or the elite of the Lahore can send their kids into that. Even in the middle class and lower middle class, we see that there's the public transport in terms of the school vans and all using, but
right,
that we need to
right.
convert more into this.
Uh,
Then the industrial use in the Lahore, I mean in the Lahore suburbs, they are break-ins, and they are the steel manufacturing facilities, and these are on the suburbs of the Lahore, and these
yeah.
are operating on a low level of technology because of the low cost, and but the problem is this high pollution. So we need to address that, as
Right,
20-25% of the pollution is coming from those sources
right,
and all that.
right. Taking
Then
the
third thing is about what you say is the crops and the crop burning and all that. And again, that's a problem in the other side of the border, India as well as the Pakistan. So we need to find out the other ways to remove the crop residuals and all
Right.
that. And but the pollution is coming across the border as well. So
Yeah.
you cannot stop the pollutants to move from the border side this to that. So for that, a coherent policy framework has to be put in between the Indian part of the Punjab and Pakistan part of the Punjab for the greater
Come
good
together.
of both the countries.
All
So
right.
that's one area where what I would say is about you need to see that how this pollution is coming and how what are the ways to mitigate it.
Right.
Then now the second question was okay, it's there for many years. What is the economic cost of it?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of economic cost, if you see this when there is a smog in the country, that the mobility of the people reduces,
Yeah.
and there would be less people in the road. There would be less business going on, so that has an indirect impact. Then the efficiency of the people the workers would go down because of the issues that with the smog and hailing can happen, and
Yeah.
people are more sitting at home, and they're using the air filters and all that, and those we import, and that's adding on to the cost as well.
So, all
So
right, I'll
there
circle
are.
back. Sorry, I'll circle back to you with because we're moving in a territory that I wanted to get a bit of an opinion, because you shared quite a few points regarding various sectors and their regulatory measures that can be put in place. So we have emission zones, we have congestion charges. So I'm going to move on to Ms. Asara Hayat for this question that, in the legal framework, we're speaking within the legal framework. So we have these examples, as Mr. Ali Khizr has shared as well, that there's congestion charges, that there's certain protocols in place for factories, industries and agriculture to be put in place that prevents, and these are certain global examples. For instance, in Beijing, on alternate days, you're allowed to use certain cars. In the UK and Europe, there's certain zero emission zones where you cannot actually take a car, as Mr. Ali Khazar pointed out, in terms of using public transport. So what do you think in terms of the regulatory landscape for air pollution in Lahore? What do you think? Do we have the right laws and the right framework in place?
Okay, so good question, but right at the offset, I'd like to say that the problem with Pakistan isn't a lack of laws. Like, we have laws. It's chukkote kaanoon pe hai, basically, but the problem is the enforcement of those laws. So, and the regulatory regime for air pollution and even for climate change is somewhat in a gray area, not for air pollution, but for climate change. And I'm actually a climate change specialist, and so air pollution sort of filters into it at some level. तो उसका समझने का तरीका ये है कि we have the federal, so we have the federation, we have the federal level, we have Islamabad, and then we have our provinces. And with the environment, what happened after the 18th Amendment to our Constitution, environment as a subject got devolved to the provinces, right? So now each province has control over its own environmental laws, and therefore has also its own environmental act. So Punjab Environment Protection Act, Sindh Environment Protection Act. But then we also have like control from the federal level. But that said, what happens is that each province also has to make its laws according to its topography and needs, right? तो सिंध में एयर पोल्यूशन का इतना क्राइसिस नहीं आता for the simple reason, आता है पर इस तरह नहीं, for the simple reason that the sea breeze keeps the air moving. Whereas for us, it becomes stagnant, and like it was very well explained, the temperature inversion then traps it also in the winters. Although I do want to stress smog, जो हम 5th season colloquially अब उसे कहते हैं, and air pollution, it's not a winter problem for us. In many parts of our country, throughout the year, perennially smog is a problem, and so is air pollution. Our AQI goes up very high, and we have very poor air quality, especially in Peshawar, some parts of Punjab, lesser in Quetta and in Sindh. But that said, so we have our Punjab, we have our Pakistan Environment Protection Act, then we have our Punjab Environment Protection Act, we have our Motor Vehicle Ordinance, we have the Penal Code, the Pakistan Penal Code, which also penalizes you for making the air nauseous for others. We have a series of NEQs, National Environment Quality Standards. So we have a series of laws. Then the Constitution, you have a right to life that's guaranteed under it. And by virtue of a case that was that came through to the Supreme Court called Shell Azia, very important case in our history. The right to life now includes the right to a clean environment. So अगर आप इसको सोचें, and I say this with a matter of great pride, पाकिस्तान में actually environment को एक बड़ा realistically एक issue कानूनी तौर पर कंसिडर किया गया है, and we have a series of constitutional writ petitions that are designed that you plead before a court of law to protect your constitutional rights, जो air pollution पे आ चुके हैं, जो smog पे आ चुके हैं. The problem though is, very simply put, there is no enforcement of our laws. आप अभी MM आलम पे बाहर निकलेंगे, you will see so many cars that are emitting fuels upon, you know, that the emissions are so high, and there's a police wala standing right there, he's not going to do anything about it. You have cars that are not serviced, but you're not doing anything about it. So the problem is enforcement. The problem is not lack of laws. We are also, just to make it very brief, we are also party to a number of international protocols, a number of international treaties, the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, ozone protection treaties. So we've done our homework, we've got the mechanism enforced, we've got everything down in theory, just the practical application and execution of it is a little dwindling.
All right, got it. Thank you for that answer. Carrying this conversation forward, that's a good point that, you know, we have the laws in place, but what about the execution? Is the awareness there for the actual individual? What is the responsibility of the citizen? But then again, it's a very curious question because, as I said, there's the federal government and there's the local government. Mr. Ahmed Iqbal, you've worked with the local government and you must be more familiar with their inner workings. How would you like to comment on, you know, about the awareness that is within the general public, but also the people upholding the law or people in different bureaucratic positions that are responsible for executing these laws? What would you think that the awareness is like amongst these people?
Thank you, Umar. Thank you for organizing this very important and timely conversation as we head into the peak smog season. So I think all of the panelists before me have set the stage, and I'm just going to tie all the things that they said. You know, there is a problem of awareness. There's a problem of enforcement. All the policy options that Ali listed. You know, we're in a nutshell, we're nowhere ready to deal with the crisis or to even begin to understand it. अगर आप अवेयरनेस की बात करें आम शहरी की, तो उसमें इस वक्त मेरे ख्याल में जो सबसे बड़ा मसला है कि देयर इज़ इंफॉर्मेशन डिस्पैरिटी. मेरा ख्याल है हम सारे लोग जो यहाँ पे बैठे हैं, हम इस मुल्क के सबसे बड़े पोल्यूटर्स हैं, क्योंकि हम सब के पास गाड़ियाँ हैं, हम सब के पास एक्सट्रीमली इनएफिशिएंट हमारा एनर्जी फुटप्रिंट है. हम लोग एक कनाल की शायद या कोठियों में रहते हैं, सोसाइटीज़ में रहते हैं, जो एक्चुअली अर्बन स्प्रॉल और इन टर्न ये जो ट्रैफिक कंजेशन है उसमें कंट्रीब्यूट करती है. सो हम लोग सिर्फ अपनी गाड़ी घर से कहीं जाने तक में कंट्रीब्यूट नहीं कर रहे होते, बल्कि हमारा पूरा लाइफस्टाइल एंड आवर आउटलुक एंड आवर you know the way we view life and you know quality of life, it comes at a huge cost. और unfortunately इस मुल्क में जो सबसे ज़्यादा exposed है वो है जो pollution नहीं कर रहा, और उस बेचारे को इस बात का पता भी नहीं है कि जब स्मॉग होती है तो हम अपने घरों में फिर भी एहतियात शुरू कर देते हैं. कुछ लोगों ने फ़िल्टर लगाए हुए हैं, कुछ लोग जो हैं वो बच्चों को बाहर पार्क में जाने नहीं देते, लेकिन अक्सरियत पाकिस्तान की जो मज़दूर हैं, किसान हैं, वो उन्होंने अपनी दिहाड़ी मजदूरी करनी है एंड देयर एट अ ग्रेटर रिस्क. दे डोंट हैव एक्सेस टू द काइंड ऑफ पब्लिक हेल्थ फैसिलिटीज़ दैट वी डू. सो मैं इसको अगर ओवरऑल फ्रेम करूँ लाहौर में और पाकिस्तान में जो स्मॉग का क्राइसिस है, मेरे ख्याल में ये हमारी पेंडेमिक है. और जितनी पाकिस्तान में हर साल सिर्फ एयर पोल्यूशन की वजह से हम बात होती हैं, वो कोरोना के सामने उनका साइज़ मांद पड़ जाता है, छोटा पड़ जाता है. और कोविड में तो फिर भी आपको एक टेस्ट पता चलता है कि जी ये पॉजिटिव था या नेगेटिव था, लेकिन इसकी जो पब्लिक हेल्थ साइड है, जो स्टेट एक्चुअली उसका भी बर्डन कैरी कर रही है कि आपके हस्पतालों में जो रेस्पिरेटरी इलनेसेस हैं, जो एस्थमेटिक पेशेंट्स हैं, पार्टिकुलेट मैटर जिस्म में कहाँ कहाँ जाके क्या क्या कुछ करता है, वो किसी ब्लड टेस्ट में नहीं आता. वो यही पता लगता है कि जी गुर्दे फेल हो गए या ये फेल हो गया. So it is our pandemic. And एक चीज़ जो बड़ी अहम है आई थिंक रियासत को शहरियों को बताने वाली, वो ये है कि इस वक्त हम एक इमरजेंसी से डील कर रहे हैं. कोरोना में हमने लोगों को बताया कि कैसे अपनी हैबिट्स चेंज करें, और वो रियासत का काम है लोगों को बताना. इस वक्त लाहौर जैसे शहर में, और ये आज से कोई 5-6 साल पुराना डेटा है, आज से 5-6 साल पहले जो स्मॉग थी, लाहौर में पैदा होने वाला हर बच्चा अपनी ज़िंदगी के 5 साल 6 साल अपनी पैदाइश के वक्त ही खो बैठता है. और आज की स्मॉग और 2016-17 की स्मॉग में ज़मीन आसमान का फ़र्क है. आज उससे कहीं ऊपर चले गए हैं. इस वक्त हम दुनिया के जिस खित्ते में बैठे हैं वो आलूदा तरीन हवा का, और मैं कहता हूँ कि ये दुनिया की लैंडफिल साइट है. अगर आप देखें तो जितने ग्लोबल एमिटर्स हैं, कहीं पे एयर पोल्यूशन का प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. नॉर्थ अमेरिका की हवा सारा साल साफ़ रहती है, यूरोप की हवा सारा साल साफ़ रहती है, इवन चाइना की हवा जो है वो भी साफ़ रहती है, क्योंकि वहाँ से घूम के ये सारे जो गर्द के गुब्बारे और जो जहरीली गैसेस हैं वो इस खित्ते पाकिस्तान और इंडिया में आके जो हैं वो बसते हैं. तो लोगों को ये सारी चीज़ें बताने की ज़रूरत है. मेरे ख़्याल में एक बड़ी अहम चीज़ ये है कि हमें ख़ुद जो समझने की ज़रूरत है. फ्लड्स के बाद जो एक दुनिया में बात हो रही है कि जी क्लाइमेट जस्टिस की बात हो रही है, कि दुनिया में कुछ ऐसे ममालिक हैं जिन्होंने तारीख़ी तौर पर बहुत पोल्यूशन की और माहौलियाती तब्दीली में अपना हिस्सा डाला. आज हम सफ़र कर रहे हैं. मेरे ख्याल में एक लोकल डिबेट होने की भी ज़रूरत है. एक लोकल क्लाइमेट जस्टिस भी है कि पाकिस्तान में कौन एमिटर्स हैं उनको आइडेंटिफाई किया जाए. गाड़ियाँ चलाने वाले एमिटर्स हैं, फैक्ट्रियों में धुआं पैदा करने वाले एमिटर्स हैं. तो इन्फोर्समेंट अगर की जाए तो इन्फोर्समेंट स्टैंडर्ड्स की जाए, स्टैंडर्ड्स बनाए जाएँ. और ये फ्यूल क्वालिटी फॉर इंस्टेंस, फ्यूल स्टैंडर्ड्स अभी तक हम इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं कर सके. आप एक एक शहरी को नहीं पकड़ सकेंगे कि धुआं दे रहा है कि नहीं दे रहा. व्हीकल टेस्टिंग जो है उसके सिस्टम्स को बेहतर बनाया जाए. और इसी तरह जो आपकी इमिशन स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं इंडस्ट्री के लिए, पावर प्लांट्स के लिए, उनको रिविज़िट करने की ज़रूरत है. और आखिरी बात, हम जिस तरह रहते हैं और हमने जिस तरह अपने शहर आबाद किए हैं, आई थिंक वो एक माइंडसेट चेंज है. वो एक पूरा का पूरा पॉलिसी, एक यू हैव टू डिसमेंटल द वे वी हैव जिस तरह की ज़िंदगियों की हमें आदत है और जिस तरह की ज़िंदगियों को हम समझते हैं कि वो बड़ी पुरआसाइश ज़िंदगी हैं. सो इट्स अ बिहेवियरल प्लस एन एनफोर्समेंट.
Thank you, Ahmed. I mean, that's a good point that, the pollution is, the part of the problem for this pollution is our lifestyle choices as well. And you made a very good point that, we need to take action at the local level, but at the same time, as Ms. Sarah pointed out, that, it's something, and then you pointed out as well, that it's something that happens elsewhere. मगर उसका impact ये होता है because of climate change or however the winds flow, कि ये आगे consider New Delhi और लाहौर के ऊपर हो जाता है. And we're not entirely, and right now, in fact, if you see, netizens are part of the debate right now, कि this is also a form of colonialism, के जो impact US UK कर रहा है उसका अभी भी impact हमें ज़्यादा आ रहा है. Like even climate change, like floods, we're suffering from this pollution, we're suffering from, but we're not entirely generating all of these problems, but we are the subject of it. Something else that you mentioned is the health crisis. It is affecting our longevity as Pakistanis. It is also does not manifest in any form के हम बता सकें कि जी blood में आया वो as a symptom आता है. We don't know if it is PM 2.5 or something else is doing this. So I'll bring this to Dr. Shahana. Firstly, that's a very good point. Is there a way to identify this direct correlation between pollution and these health crises? And firstly, how do you think that we can deal some of the health problems emerging directly from air pollution?
In terms of how we can protect ourselves from pollution to reduce the adverse health effects, several people have started doing that, as you pointed out. You can filter the air coming into a room. You live in a closed box, you prefer to have it air conditioned or heated during the winter months, windows closed, so you're in a box. If you have a standalone filter, which is depending on the flow rate of the filter, how effective it is, because you can have a standalone filter and you think you can have a quality air that you're breathing in, but if it doesn't have a high enough flow rate, then the volume of air in the room will not pass through the filter at a rate high enough to reduce the air quality, to reduce the particulate concentration in the room. So a standalone filter with a high enough flow rate will give you cleaner air in that closed box that you're living in. But you are going to step outside, you're going to go to the bathroom, you're going to go elsewhere in the house. You can't just always live in a closed box. In which case, you really just need to do your part in reducing outdoor air pollution. That's how you would, because, like rightly said, that when you're born in Lahore, you've already lost 5 years of your life, and this is based on that on data from several years back. But studies have, this is going towards the first question then, there have been some systemic studies. So for instance, cancer can be caused by inflammation, and inflammation is caused by reactive oxygen species on particles. So there's a sort of pathway. Okay, ROS, reactive oxygen species on particles, will lead to inflammation. Our antibodies in our lungs, in our lung fluid, will not be able to compensate for too much ROS, if there's too much ROS on the particles, which will lead to inflammation, which will lead to downstream cancer. So there have been some systemic studies like that, but it's hard to pinpoint because there are so many confounding factors, in which case people do public health studies where they're just direct correlations, like for instance with the high PM concentration days, how did they correlate with hospital visits? How did they correlate with percentage mortality on those days? You can correlate different regions, so high ozone concentration regions, how does the mortality correlate in those regions as opposed to regions with lower ozone concentrations. So things like that link different diseases, as I mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. All right, thank you. That's a very good point. I mean, like, we have the correlation, we have the study, so we already talked about awareness, and then the law is there as well. But maybe what we're utterly lacking is the incentive then. Mr. Ali Khizr, I would like to address this question to you. Like, the laws are there, we have a certain amount of awareness, we have the measures we can take to prevent it. But what do you think is missing in terms of incentive that private and government bodies should have, or even as a private individual or a citizen I should have? What incentives should be in place that actually put me into action? You know, it's a call to action that I actually do it. I know the laws are there, I know that, you know, these are the right choices. What can push me to make those right choices at a personal level, at a government level, at a private corporate level?
So one thing that Pakistan laws are not really implemented, and that there's an issue of contract enforcement and all that. And in any market, whatever the form of law exists and whatever the enforcement is, the incentive of pricing really works on that. So when you work on the incentive of pricing and based on that, let the people to make the choices which are climate friendly choices. In terms of the transportation, then you have a law of you need to change these the automobiles exhaust systems. You have to change that. That's a law that's there. You have to, but there's a cost associated with that. Will government be able to provide subsidy, or if they not provide subsidy, the price of the vehicle would go up? Will the consumer afford it? So those kind of questions we need to ask on those. Then on if you have a problem of crop burning, so then you put alternative you have providing to them. How is government providing some service to collect it and reuse that thing? And then about the industries and all that. Okay, where enforcement is required. Okay, you're not supposed to sell anything that has been produced in that. So those kind of things you required, and the pricing is the most important. To me, the best part is again coming back to the transportation is the biggest part. About the 50% or 40% plus your contribution is coming from the transportation and all that. And in that, what you can do is like now there you need to have a deregulation of prices in that. For example, petroleum prices, if they are deregulated, and there's approximately 1 billion liter of petrol and diesel used by transportation in Lahore. And so if you charge like 1 extra rupee on that, so that'll give you that much amount of money per month, and then you use that money for transportation and the other thing. So there you need to have the functioning local government. You have to have a functioning federal. The provincial government focusing on those issues. But again, the provinces are too big. I mean, you need to cut down into the smaller city size. So that's why you functioning local government, or if you have a smaller administrative units, then this thing can improve, because there's a problem in Lahore. Lahore is a big problem. So people of Lahore would pay for it, and then that money should be used for deploying on that. So that's I think the incentive pricing and using that money into that. But once you go to the federal side, and when the federal side, if you set the money, then it's a black hole. You know, the kind of fiscal implication we have over there. So that's why it has to be there at the local level. And at the federal level, you have to have a certain, again, for the federal level, that from the engineering development board side, you have to have a certain specification countrywide. And on those, on the vehicle exhaust, on the machinery which you're using and other things. So those needs to be enforced from the federal level, and the pricing incentive should come from the local level and the provincial level. And then awareness, of course, awareness is a very important thing. I mean, there's a federal level, then there's a provincial level, then there's then the city level, and so there's a confusion. Then there the cross-border issues as well, as in Lahore is rightly next to the Indian part. So how to incentivize people of the Lahore to use it is to get the price level right. So I mean, one incentive is like you increase the petroleum prices in Lahore, deregulate the petroleum prices. Lahore charges its tax for the petrol used over here in it, and maybe a billion liter petrol and diesel is used a month in Lahore. That will generate you ₹1 billion in a way, and that can be used in for building the road infrastructure. I mean, the public transport infrastructure and other mechanisms. Then apply taxes on inefficient use of those machinery and all that, and use that to improve it and all that. So and then a charge congestion test on peaking roads, especially in the schools and colleges areas and all that, and the peaking time, and so that to encourage people to use that. Okay, then make those big plazas on the public transport corridor, and charge high, like on a Ferozpur road. The bike is not supposed to come. Okay, you just park your car off the bike off the Ferozpur road, and then take a bus over there, and then in the end, where you get that stop there, you can rent a bike and go over there. So though the private solutions can come in if you put it the right way, and you need to do it, and then it's best to have it on the third tier level. That's why I'm saying that having something at a local Lahore level is very important. I mean, you have to reach out to the city level, and to have that there should be functioning government within the city level to work and see on the how to work on the environment and reduce the smog in Lahore. So it's a big issue in Lahore. It's a big issue in other cities of the Punjab. So it's sooner or later there has to be the central government, the federal, the provincial government has to raise to the occasion and work on it. And ideally, we should evolve that to the third tier, and there should be a mechanism based on the pricing to change the behavior. Having said that, the younger population has much more awareness about the, climate change and about the use of pollutants and what are the sources of pollutant, and they discourage themselves. So over the period of time, the habits will change and things will start improving. So, but at this point of time, you take the pricing right to discourage people to use certain kind of things which are bad for them.
All right, moving on from what Ali said, and Sarah, earlier you said, that there's the federal government, there's the local government, there's the private sector, and then there's the individual responsibility of the citizen. So basically, what we're getting away from this panel right now is that, we all of us have to come together to find a solution of what we're facing. One of such is community-driven initiatives, like we have the Air Visual app, we have Abid Umar, the founder of Paki, privately owned sensors being placed around the city. So I earlier did, some research on that. So the Environmental Protection Agency of Punjab actually floated a circular saying that private individuals are no longer allowed to report air pollution, and if they continue to do so, the cyber law might be used against them in that context. So would you like to reflect some light on that? As a joint effort, while we were doing these things, what are some of the cons of doing it? What are some of the pros of doing it? Should we still allow for something like that to happen? Because it is a good initiative.
Right. The con is fairly evident, and I think probably the backbone of why the circular came out also, which is you can't have false information circulating around. Like, that is dangerous. And so if you don't have the correct information, just please don't circulate it. And in all areas of life, not just for air pollution. And I'm guessing that was part of the reason why the circular came out. Also, if you have false information, people get very scared. I mean, and so with air pollution, your right to life, your right to health, your right to education in our part of the world, because we're shutting down schools, all of them are getting infringed. And if you've got an abundance of data that doesn't tally or that's false, then the government has to be responsible because they have to guarantee you those rights, right? But that said, I think the more important part of the question is what can civil society do, and whether this should be a joint effort or whether this should be like the onus should shift to the civil society. Well, ideally it should be a joint effort. But in a perfect world, utopically, the government would handle all of this for us, and we'd just chill and twiddle our thumbs. But unfortunately for us, that's not happening. So we need a joint effort, and world over, the civil society has risen again and again to safeguard their rights, to demand for their rights, and I don't know why Pakistanis can't do that. They can. आपके पास हर सहूलत है अपनी आवाज़ उठाने के लिए, और मैं ये बता दूं कि आपकी आवाज़ सुनी जाती है. ये बात नहीं है that the echelons of power are oblivious to your voices. They are not. आपकी आवाज़ इस्लामाबाद तक पहुंचती है, पॉलिसी बनती है. So that said, it's very important कि आप onus सिर्फ हुकूमत पे मत shift करें, because I'll tell you what, if you stand on their side of the fence, it's tough. Industry बंद करना एक tough चीज़ है, especially for an economy that's already always in a bit of a rut. School बंद करना एक tough चीज़ है. But then what is your role? It was very articulately put when Umar Saab said that school bus honi chahiye. But I'll tell you what, I have visited multiple private schools and said कि भाई आप school buses क्यों नहीं देते? And you know what they say? They say हम school bus देते हैं और बच्चों के माँ बाप कहते हैं हम school bus में नहीं बैठाएंगे. So the problem is in our society, it's our narrative, it's our mind frame, and that's where you guys come in. You know what? You guys have to think school buses are cool and they will become cool. You guys have to start carpooling and it will become a fad. You guys have to think about taking, and I'm not saying it's easy because we don't have the right structures in place, but you guys have to think about taking public transportation. We all have to, not you guys, we all have to do it. And then it'll become a flow, it'll become part and parcel of our life. So the civil society, all of us, each of us has a role to play when it comes to the smog crisis. And जहाँ तक आप मदद कर सकते हैं अपनी, अगर आप, if you can afford a filter in your house, air purifier, then put it. If you can afford to give it to a school, please do donate. Charity is it's why not? If you can, all you can afford is to give people face masks. दें आप marginalized communities को दें, जिसने बाइक पे बैठना है उसको आप face mask दें, उसको आप आगाही create करें उनके लिए. Tell your staff at home, tell your staff at offices that look, air pollution is a problem. It's a problem for your health. It's going to have, it's going to impair your cognitive well-being, your child's well-being. Educate them. That's something you can do at a very micro, at a very individual level, and you should take responsibility for it. It's absolutely pertinent that you do.
Thank you, sir, for that answer. So basically, it comes back to having those lifestyle choices, and then you're saying the private individual should stay encouraged to continue taking those initiatives with a certain pinch of salt, that it does not spread misinformation. Moving on to Mr. Ahmed, again talking about the individual action and talking about the action of the local governments precisely. What more can the local government do for air pollution? What can we again do more as a private individual and as the local government for more greener, sustainable cities? And how does, I'm sorry, the question is a mouthful, but how does carbon pricing also play a role in that?
All very important questions. I think, so let me be a bit contrarian here. World over, mayors are at the heart of climate action. ठीक है, बड़े-बड़े मुल्क climate action की बात नहीं कर रहे क्योंकि उनके national interests probably, but then there are nuanced views. For instance, Manhattan will not be around, in the future. ये global warming, sea level is rise करते हैं. So Michael Bloomberg, mayor of New York, was a leading voice. So American president से भी बड़ी voice थी. दुनिया में अब वो रियलाइज़ कर रहे हैं बिकॉज emissions आर फोकस्ड अराउंड humans and humans live in cities, they're concentrated in cities, so it's the way we live, the way we use energy that is sort of contributing to climate change. So आप adaptation, mitigation जो भी बात करें वो ज़्यादातर around cities है, around उसमें local action involved है. So local governments का role बहुत important है. बदकिस्मती से पाकिस्तान में local governments हैं ही नहीं. ये conversation भी actually लाहौर के टाउन हॉल में हो रही होनी चाहिए थी कि लाहौर में स्मॉग आने वाली है, शहरियों को क्या ऐसे इकदाम लेने की ज़रूरत है जिससे उनकी ज़िंदगी में बेहतर आए, ज़िंदगियाँ महफूज रह सकें. और ये लाहौर के मुख्तलिफ मोहल्लों के, टाउन्स के, यूसीज़ के इलेक्टेड नाजिम, टाउन नाजिम बैठ के वहाँ पे बात करते हैं कि जी मेरी यूसी में इतनी पिछले स्मॉग सीज़न में डेथ्स हुई मेरी, और एक इन्फॉर्म्ड नैरेटिव होता, पब्लिक हेयरिंग्स होती, नौजवान जाते बात करते जो क्लाइमेट एक्टिविस्ट हैं. यहाँ से इस्लामाबाद जाके कोई प्रोटेस्ट नहीं करेगा. यहाँ से एंड क्वाइट फ्रैंकली द गवर्नमेंट इज़ नॉट रेडी फॉर इट, द गवर्नमेंट इज़ नॉट प्रिपेयर्ड फॉर इट. हमारे इंस्टीट्यूशनल अरेंजमेंट्स टू डील विद क्लाइमेट एंड एनवायरनमेंट आर ऑलमोस्ट नॉन एग्जिस्टेंट एंड दे आर नॉट इन लाइन विद द काइंड ऑफ एफर्ट एंड एक्शन वी नीड राइट नाउ इन पाकिस्तान. दुनिया के वो शहर जहाँ पे AQI या जो भी they're way below the safe limits as determined by WHO, they have climate action plans and they're sort of creating green jobs or वो urban transportation, mass transit, integrated transit, and there is a total rethink happening in that space. और वो सारा local government के पास होता है कि आपने शहर को कैसे प्लान करना है, क्या आपने यहाँ से लेकर सुखे की तक हाउसिंग सोसाइटीज़ बना के पूरे शहर को फ्लैट फैलाना है, या जैसे आप पुराने शहर हैं, आप सब हम लोग सब यहीं अब देखते हैं, जो आप पुराने शहर लाहौर चले जाएं, किसी भी पंजाब के शहर में या पाकिस्तान के चले जाएं, गाड़ी आपके पास ना भी हो तो आप बड़ी अच्छी ज़िंदगी गुजारते हैं. आप ऊपर से नीचे आते हैं, नीचे दुकानें भी हैं, नीचे रेस्टोरेंट भी हैं, नीचे चाय का ठेला भी लगा हुआ है. आपने जो काम करना है ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा आपको साइकिल मोटरसाइकिल में 10-15 मिनट. अब दुनिया जो है वो 15 मिनट सिटी की बात कर रहा है. पेरिस में मेयर एन हिडाल्गो इज़ बीइंग सीन एज द चैम्पियन ऑफ द 15 मिनट सिटी कॉन्सेप्ट. बार्सिलोना में सुपर ब्लॉक्स, एंड वी एक्चुअली इनहेरिटेड दैट ट्रेडिशन. By not having citizens' voices figure into the way we're building our cities, what is happening is that the most poor and vulnerable are being left out. और इस वक्त हम 2000 गालिबन 15 में पाकिस्तान में गाड़ियों के ओनर्स का रेट था 6%, इस वक्त 9% है. सो सिर्फ इस 3 परसेंटेज पॉइंट राइज ने आप देखेंगे आपको इमिशंस के हवाले से क्या दिया, और अभी हम कहीं भी नहीं खड़े हुए. सो वी नीड टू थिंक अबाउट a society where there is जो आपकी कार डिपेंडेंसी कम से कम हो, चलने, पैदल चलना, बाइक करना, इंटीग्रेटेड ट्रांजिट का मतलब ये है कि आप घर से बाहर निकलें पैदल तो आपको कोई बस मिल जाए, वो बस जाके मेट्रो से मिल जाए, और पूरा आपका रूट जो है वो ट्रांसपोर्ट अर्बन ट्रांसपोर्ट नेटवर्क इतना वेल लेड आउट हो कि आप मॉडल शिफ्ट भी करते रहें तो आप A से B तक बआसानी पहुंच सकें. सो ये एक बहुत बड़ा पैराडाइम शिफ्ट है जो हमें इस वक्त चाहिए. जो दूसरा आपका सवाल था सस्टेनेबल सिटीज़ और ग्रीन सिटीज़, आई थिंक दैट इज़ आल्सो एड्रेस्ड बाय दैट. वी नीड टू एम्पावर लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स, वी नीड टू गिव पीपल द पावर यूसी लेवल तक. जब तक अब हमें यूनियन काउंसिल में काउंसलर्स को, यूथ को, लोकल गवर्नमेंट सिस्टम की एक बहुत बड़ा जो फीचर था पंजाब में, 9000 यूथ काउंसलर्स पूरे पंजाब के हर ज़िले, हर शहर से इलेक्ट होके इन टाउन काउंसिल्स में, इन यूनियन काउंसिल्स में बैठते. और आई थिंक ये एक ऐसा मसला है जो नौजवान पाकिस्तान के साथ ज़्यादा रेजोनेट करता है, क्योंकि ये वो नस्ल है जिसने अपनी आने वाली सारी ज़िंदगी इस मुल्क में गुजारनी है. आप इस वक्त कोई भी क्लाइमेट IPCC की प्रोजेक्शंस अगर पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पढ़ लें, 2000 हम इस वक्त इतनी ख़तरनाक डगर पर हैं कि 2050 तक हो सकता है कि यहाँ पे कहत साली और एग्रीकल्चर, फूड सिक्योरिटी, एयर पोल्यूशन आपके पास है, सामने है, वाटर टेबल इज़ रिसीडिंग, वाटर क्वालिटी, यू डोंट हैव ड्रिंकेबल वाटर पूरे पंजाब में, बल्कि पूरे पाकिस्तान में. किसी शहर के पास सैनिटरी लैंडफिल साइट मौजूद नहीं है कि आपका जो कूड़ा सारा ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट, हर किस्म का वेस्ट वो इकट्ठा करके जहाँ कहीं जगह मिलती है वहाँ पे फेंक देते हैं। और वो भी इट इज़ ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द मेजर कंट्रीब्यूटर्स टू ग्रीन हाउस गैस एमिशंस। ये जो लाहौर की आपकी महमूद बूटी वाली साइट है, इसके बारे में तो आर्टिकल भी अभी आया था। तो ये वो चीज़ें हैं जो लोकल गवर्नमेंट के करने वाली हैं, और बदकिस्मती से इस मुल्क में इस वक्त लोकल गवर्नमेंट का बुरा हाल है। सो माय मैसेज टू ऑल दोज हु आर व्यूइंग दिस एंड हु आर सिटिंग हियर इज़ टू डिमांड this from your public representatives, from your political parties, till the time that you don't challenge them and you don't make these issues important for you. हर कोई इस वक्त यूथ की बात कर रहा है। मैं सारा से थोड़ा सा डिसएग्री करूँगा कि अगर इस्लामाबाद वाले या लाहौर वाले सुन रहे होते तो इस वक्त पाकिस्तान की सियासत जो है वो तुम चोर या बैरूनी साजिश या इन चीज़ों पे नहीं हो रही होती, वो क्लाइमेट पे हो रही होती, वो लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स पे हो रही होती, वो एजुकेशन रिफॉर्म पे हो रही होती, वो पब्लिक हेल्थ पे हो रही होती। सो अगेन आई एम ऑल्सो एंडिंग ऑन दैट कॉन्ट्रेरियन नोट दैट मे बी हमारी आवाज़ पहुँच नहीं रही या लो है। सो यू नीड टू बी द change agents.
Thank you, Ahmed, for that answer. And I mean, that's a very good point that cities need to not be built for cars, but for individuals in such a manner that these emissions can be reduced. I'm going to end with this note that, basically the founder of Paki did say that when such smog events happen, when such climate disasters happen, it is a silver lining because it pushes people into action. Like LA in the 1950s was as grey as Lahore is during November, and New York and London and Europe used to be that way. But when these things happen, people do jump into action, it happens. Now the question is, for our local community and as Pakistanis, do we have the same ethic for it? If something disastrous happen, will we also spring into action? And are these disasters actually a silver lining to act on? And with that, I will open the floor to questions. And if anybody has any questions for our panelists, please do have them.
So I'm going to hit the nail on the head. Mr. Ahmed, thank you for pointing out the idea of inequality and global justice that is prevalent. और हमने बात भी एक की है colonialism and all that. My question, it is a question, कि हम बात करते हैं economic cost of pollution. That is always the first thing, even before the legal one. So अगर हम economic cost की बात करते हैं, तो is the answer to air pollution or any kind of pollution, in your view, in the view of the panelists, degrowth? एक degrowth का बात की जाती है जो कि कहा जाता है कि आप फिर जैसे I don't agree with Mr. Ali के गाड़ियाँ बनाना बंद कर दें, इंडस्ट्रीज़ बंद कर दें. That is not the answer. I don't believe that is. क्योंकि ये वही बात है ना कि I'm sorry again, I do not agree with the ideas of developed versus developing world. I think the better term is global north versus the global south. Global north ने अपनी industrial revolution कर ली, they have grown dramatically, exponentially, और जब अब हमारी the global south की बारी आ रही है तो they like नहीं आप ना करें क्योंकि उससे पोल्यूशन बढ़ रही है, आप अपनी इंडस्ट्री बंद कर दें, आप अपना ट्रांसपोर्ट बंद कर दें. तो क्या डीग्रोथ ग्लोबल जस्टिस में है क्या? आई डोंट मतलब व्हाट डू यू गाइस थिंक इज डीग्रोथ द आंसर टू द पॉलिसी आंसर टू द प्रॉब्लम पोल्यूशन एंड इन एयर पोल्यूशन? क्योंकि जैसे बात हुई कि फ्लड्स, हम लोग सिर्फ पाकिस्तान 1% ऑफ द कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड बनाता है, विच इज़ एक्चुअली अंडर द लिमिट जो पाकिस्तान को दी गई है. फिर भी वी आर मोस्ट वल्नरेबल टू व्हेन इट कम्स टू क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबिलिटी. नंबर 1 में आई थिंक टॉप 5 कंट्रीज़ में आते हैं. तो क्या ये ग्लोबल जस्टिस या किसी तरह की भी फेयरनेस है कि हमें कह दिया जाए पाकिस्तान या इंडिया उस तरह की कंट्रीज़ को कि प्लीज़ स्टॉप ग्रोइंग, डी ग्रोथ करें ताकि पोल्यूशन का हल निकले? थैंक यू.
मतलब इस सवाल को मैं थोड़ा सा तोड़ देता हूँ 2 हिस्सों में. ये जस्टिस है कि जिन्होंने इस दुनिया की माहौलियाती आलूदगी में बहुत ज़्यादा हिस्सा डाला, वो अब आज जो सब हम उसकी कॉस्ट उठा रहे हैं वो हमारा नुकसान भरें. ये तो इतना जस्टिस है. लेकिन ये मतलब नहीं है कि आप अगर आज रीओरिएंट करते हैं अपनी इकोनॉमी को तो आप कोई डी ग्रोथ की तरफ चले जाएंगे. डी कार्बनाइज करने का मतलब डी ग्रोथ करना नहीं है. फॉसिल फ्यूल लेड जो ग्रोथ है उसके बहुत सारी कॉस्ट हैं. अभी हमने ह्यूमन कॉस्ट का तज़किरा किया. मतलब क्या आप चाहते हैं वाकई कि और आलूदगी बढ़ती रहे? तो आई थिंक इस चीज़ पे तो सबका कंसेंसस है कि हमने माहौल को बेहतर बनाना है और जो नुकसान हो चुका है उसका माजी में जो हो चुका है उसका मदावा करना है। ट्रांसपोर्ट सेक्टर की अगर बात कर लें तो ये 2014-15 में एक वर्किंग पेपर जिसमें मैं भी आई वाज वन ऑफ द ऑथर्स, एंड वी फिगर्ड आउट कि अगर पूरी दुनिया हाईवेज़ और रोड्स और पार्किंग लॉट्स बनाना छोड़ दे, एक ट्रैवल डिमांड है उसको पूरा करने के लिए, अगर आप बसेस, BRTs, मेट्रोज़ और रेलवे पे इन्वेस्ट करना शुरू कर दें, तो द स्टडी एक्चुअली शोड के जहाँ दुनिया के सारे ममालिक को $2.5 ट्रिलियन एनुअली खर्च करने होंगे, वो कोई $1.5 ट्रिलियन में दुनिया की ट्रैवल नीड्स भी पूरी हो जाएंगी और एमिशंस भी कम हो जाएंगी। आप 1.5-2 डिग्री सिनेरियो। सो मतलब ऐसी बात नहीं है कि अगर हम पे कोई पाबंदी है। इस वक्त टेक्नोलॉजी में इतनी इनोवेशन हो रही है, क्लीन एनर्जी में। मैं इसको इस तरह नहीं देखता, बल्कि अब तो ग्रीन, दिस इज़ एक्चुअली एन अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर यंग पीपल टू ऑल्सो, there is a lot of climate finance investment available for social enterprise, entrepreneurs, to create green jobs, and I think we should have a positive outlook towards it. It's also about our future and then the future of this planet.
I'd like to weigh in a little also. What you said, I think, comes from a place of anger that I come across a lot in my field of work. But let me tell you, ek to good on you, global south and global north, 100%, not developing and not developed. I think it's very important that we shift our own narrative in our own heads also. The idea isn't about degrowth anymore. Like, the idea should be, number one, producing to meet needs and not wants, right? So capitalism definitely is something that has to be considered. It has to weigh in on any conversation on climate change, right? In any conversation. But जो आपकी बात है कि पाकिस्तान makes the list of top 10 countries most impacted by climate change. We contribute about 0.8% to global greenhouse gas emissions. Absolutely, but that doesn't exonerate us from responsibility. This is something that needs to be carved in stone now. You cannot turn around and I say this is my personal opinion, and I know that the country is suffering immensely because of floods which are exacerbated by climate change. I'm fighting for those floods and within international media, asking for reparations, but I want to stress again and again, just because the global north is responsible for climate change, for air pollution, for a number of menaces, doesn't mean that Pakistan gets to exonerate itself. We can't. It's just not an opportunity. It's just not a possibility anymore. एक positive outlook की ज़रूरत है. उसको degrowth की angle से मत देखें. उसको उस angle से देखें कि एक balance create किया जाए. You produce only enough to meet your needs. You produce green. Your industries should have filters in it, so the air pollution is reduced. Your transportation should be green. It should be fuel efficient. We should, if there are vehicles, if we can't shift entirely to public transportation, we still need to reduce our vehicular emissions. So whatever we're doing isn't about degrowth, and I agree, हमारी economies नहीं ले सकती कि आप बंद कर दें industry. वो मैंने आप बात पहले भी की थी, smog की हुकूमत कैसे बंद कर दें industry महीने के लिए. But it should not be about degrowth. It should just be about a balance now.
If I can add just a couple of examples. So specifically, brick kilns के emissions खराब है, right? Zigzag technology reduces those emissions. Obviously, somebody needs to fund the zigzag technology कि वो incorporate हो, but वो step ले लिया जाए तो brick kilns जारी रहें. गाड़ियों में catalytic converter होगा तो emissions कम हो जाएंगी. नहीं होगा, yes, there is some cost to put in that catalytic converter, but to not do anything is literally being like कि मेरी responsibility नहीं है, मैं कुछ नहीं कर रहा हूँ. Taking a step will require some funds, but वो easy enough options हैं, fixes हैं, और develop होने ही चाहिए. Awareness होगी तो फिर demand increase करेगी तो फिर supply आएगी उन चीज़ों की. बिल्कुल.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. So I have a question regarding the brick kiln emissions that you just mentioned. So over the last summer, I had the opportunity to visit how the government had enforced the method of installing zigzag technology within the brick kiln industry. What I observed on the policy level was, number one, that all of the policy measures on the level of enforcement is done immediately. you do not give the small or the medium business owners the time to implement those changes. And what it's done is that immediately you ask them, you give them a week or a month to install the technology, which is not economically as well as possible to implement that. And once they don't do that, you stop the overall industry. You kind of put in front deterrents in order to do that. Now, what it does is that it kind of gives them not an economic incentive, but a decentive to work towards the policy you want to implement. So the two problems that I saw was, number one, that they have like a very reactive approach where the policy measures are not thought through, but they are enforced immediately, and the workers are not incentivized to actually implement that change. Number two, I also saw that connections and corruption also play a very important role. In whatever policy you want to bring in, there's always loopholes for people to be left off the hook. Or there be a chance where someone can pass off corruption and then they can not be looked at with the same lens of implementation. So in that regard, how do you view these policy measures, and if there is anything else with regard to the air pollution, what implementation strategies should we use to make sure that the policies that we want to implement with regard to pollution, we make sure that it happens and it stays at a consistent level as well. We enforce it, but the consistency is also not there as well. So if anyone of the panel would like to.
It's more of a policy thing, but my 2 cents in it would be that there are challenges to actually enforcing these things, and if to expect a short turnaround time is also the government. जो आपने कहा कि put yourself in the government's shoes. फ़ौरन चाहिए changes, public outcry है कि जी smog इतना हो गया है, तो अब जल्दी से implement करना है, तो इसलिए so it's hard to implement, but it goes into कि कुछ तो करना चाहिए. अब उसको किस तरह से उन्होंने frame किया, उसकी implementation is where that's our weakness. हम strategies develop कर देंगे और फिर उसका implementation अगर strict enough नहीं करेंगे तो ख़राबी है, strictly करेंगे तो ख़राबी है.
If I could add to it, so बदकिस्मती से वही जो पहले global north versus global south वाला सवाल था, हमारे मुल्क में भी एक नॉर्थ और साउथ है. और जैसा कि डॉक्टर शहाना in her presentation and paper showed us that there are big polluters. So big polluters are, let's say, in the context of Lahore, all this, steel factories around the ring road, which you see when you're passing by, all the privately owned motor vehicles. Motor vehicle owners represent a fraction of Lahore's citizens, and but they are one of the biggest contributor. Now, brick kilns and rice, ये जो stubble burning, crop burning, are two of the most smallest, but also the most marginalized and coming from poorer segments of society. So that is exactly what I was saying. Okay, hold these people accountable, hold the big polluters accountable, and unfortunately, the state has gone after those जिनके पीछे जाना आसान है, and I totally agree with you. It is extremely unfair कि हम जो बड़ी बड़ी इंडस्ट्री लगी हुई है उसको रेगुलेट नहीं कर सकते, लेकिन अभी जब राइस ये हार्वेस्टिंग सीज़न आएगा तो हम फार्मर्स को, पुअर फार्मर्स को पकड़ के थानों में बंद करेंगे, और पुअर गाइज दे फैमिलीज दे मिस देयर नेक्स्ट सोइंग सीजन बिकॉज ऑफ दैट. थाने, पर्चे, कचहरियाँ. Similarly for brick kilns, I know that because I come from an area where the brick kilns were shut for how many seasons, and so it is unfair. There has to be an element of equity in it, who we go after, और हम किसको कितना time दे रहे हैं, किसको कितना facilitate कर रहे हैं. I think I totally agree with you. If Pakistan has access to these green climate funds and all of that, then we should design programs in partnership with local governments, with administration, to facilitate this conversion over a certain period of time. Let them even if new technologies, they have to adapt or adopt new technologies, we're giving out loans, subsidized loans to God knows, there are subsidies everywhere. Even Lahore Gymkhana is a huge subsidy for the rich. We don't talk about these things. But when it comes to the poor business owner or the farmer, the state goes in कि जी बस हमने ये बंद कर दिया है तो स्मॉग ख़त्म हो जाएगी, और स्मॉग ख़त्म नहीं हुई. स्मॉग के क्योंकि सबसे बड़े पोल्यूटर्स जो हैं उनका साइज ग्रो कर रहा है, मोटराइजेशन इज़ ग्रोइंग. लेट्स टॉक अबाउट दैट, लेट्स मेक दैट एन इशू. That's how I agree with you.
So basically I belong to the health tech sector of Pakistan and smog basically became a very serious issue around 5 years ago when due to multiple factors, actually rice burning being one of them, it became very unbreathable in Lahore. So that's how, coming from the business sector, there was a huge opportunity to sell those KN95 masks that 3M was coming out with, and as you know very well, due to the COVID pandemic, those have globally become unavailable. And that also gave an opportunity to get into purifiers, and I had to do a lot of research naturally about the state of air pollution in Pakistan. So we're talking, and you have touched upon, emissions from cars that use petrol, but none of you actually mentioned the fact that we have still failed to procure copious amounts of Euro 4 grade petrol in Pakistan. So for those who aren't aware, what we've historically been using is Euro 2 grade petrol, which has around 500 ppm particulates per million of sulfur, whereas the Euro 2 standard is using only a tenth of that. So that's one question. And then a further background is that I think automotive pollution is still quite on the rise. The first, I think, legislation that came about was the Lahore Clean Air Commission in 2003 that actually pushed for more uses of public transportation and carpooling. And when you talked about China, so specifically what they've done over the past 10 years of their initiatives is they had around close to 120, 130 days of an AQI that was unbearable, which might have been about 300, 400. They've now reduced that to 30. So my question is that how come we're not talking about or not pushing legislature to get more Euro 4 petrol in the country? And also I wanted to ask you, what has been the impact of that air pollution, mainly through smog, of ground level ozone seeping into Pakistan and its effect on the environment?
I talked about it, fuel standards, and I think it's very important. Again, big oil refineries getting away with it. They're supposed to be adhering to Euro 4, I think, right? And they're still not there. And then discount for the fact that when this the refinery से डिपो तक जाता है, फिर डिपो से जब पंप तक आता है और फिर बड़े शहर के पंप में आता है, छोटे शहर के पंप में आता है, तो वो यूरो 2 का भी कोई बहुत छोटा वर्जन बन के, it's actually fuel quality goes down. There's adulteration in it all throughout the chain. And China is such a great example, because China had a huge public health issue. जब ओलंपिक्स आ रही थी तो बड़ा वेस्ट की तरफ से आया कि जी हमने ओलंपिक्स नहीं खेलने जाना, वहाँ पे इतना बड़ा क्राइसिस है, and they turned it around. Obviously they have the resources, and they are also now heavily invested in sort of reorienting their economy, because China is looking for a leadership role. और climate politics इस वक्त जो है वो दुनिया की politics को भी असरअंदाज कर रही है. So उन्होंने यही चीज़ें की कि they made a massive shift towards public transportation. Chinese cities are now seen as, they're moving towards sustainable, high-rise, dense, mixed-use cities, जो हमारे यहाँ अभी तक बात करनी भी नहीं हमने शुरू की कि हमने कैसे करना है. China में उन्होंने massive investments in EV, electric vehicle fleet, for public transportation. Now, what's the opportunity for Pakistan? मैं motorcycles को बिल्कुल पाकिस्तान में मसला नहीं देखता, रिक्शों को मसला नहीं देखता. मैं गाड़ियों को इसलिए मसला देखता हूँ क्योंकि गाड़ियाँ लेने वाले जो हैं, electric motorbikes are being produced in Pakistan. Electric rickshaws are now being produced in Pakistan, locally manufactured, and they are going to potentially reshape mobility in our cities, क्योंकि आपकी शहर में जितने भी trips होते हैं वो आप हमारी आदतें ख़राब हैं, घर से जाके डबल रोटी भी लेके जानी है तो गाड़ी को सेल्फ लगा के जाते हैं. So these are affordable options. ये 2-wheeler 3-wheeler EVs अगर आएंगे, and if the government stops subsidizing these large fossil fuel run motor companies, and you actually see an opportunity here to reduce your, ये तो मतलब it makes sense from all aspects. आपका fuel dependency भी कम होगी, आपकी गाड़ियों के जो parts import होते हैं उस पर भी dependence कम होगी, and I see 2- and 3-wheelers electric space में as a potential game changer for Pakistan.
And then we should also refrain from doing projects like the one in Sahiwal, which is a 1320 megawatt project that's based on coal. So actually Sahiwal is the second worst polluted city in Lahore after Lahore because of that one plant.
Yes, absolutely. मेरा नारोवाल district है,
अच्छा,
जहाँ का मैं local government head था. So back in 2002 they put an RFO run IPP in the middle of farmland. Rice paddy basmati, the most premium basmati belt of जो है दुनिया की, और over years वहाँ पे लोगों को बीमारियाँ शुरू हो गई हैं वहाँ पे. I mean we need to. Yeah.
All right, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you for our panelists for their very useful insights for our cities and our nation in terms of tackling air pollution, and hopefully we can all jump into call and action and act towards finding sustainable solutions. Thank you everyone.